Delighted to welcome right now the Shadow Housing Secretary, Conservative MP, Kevin Hollinrake, to the show. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, I'm sure you've been glued to your radio, your television, watching and listening to what Rachel Reeves has had to say about growth. It's not just words. There's some actual, real hard stuff in there. We're talking about backing this Old Trafford expansion, a lot about this Oxford, Cambridge, Silicon Valley, but also the expectation we had all this morning was that we were going to get that announcement, and we've got it. Not just Rachel Reeves, the government. That means the cabinet collectively are backing a third runway at Heathrow. A, do you think it'll ever happen? And B, will all of this deliver the growth that she talks so much about?
Well, let's see. I mean, Heathrow, in principle, I'm not against Heathrow. It's something I voted for myself in previous parliaments. I think it's some real logistical difficulties around Heathrow. I don't fancy the taxpayer having to pick up the tab to move the M25, for example, and move it where when you've got reservoirs all around where it is right now. So there's some challenges. But again, we believe we want economic growth. We want to see these big projects rolled out more quickly. But I find it pretty galling, the whole thing. Rachel Reeves has killed the economy, and now he's talking about growth and boosterism. I mean, she killed the economy in three ways. She talked the country down for 6 months, but the fear have got into every business person in the UK and anybody thinking of moving here. She then whacked massive tax increases on business of £25 billion a year and expects business to just suck it up. And coming down the track, there are huge amount of red tape for businesses in the shape, particularly of the Employment Rights Bill, which will wrap business up in red tape, will hit hiring, reduce the number of jobs, and reduce the level of pay increases people will have. So all of which are important for growth.
Yeah, although interestingly, the one thing you didn't mention there was net zero policies, which of course your last government completely pursued as well, which are completely the opposite of delivering growth. There aren't going to be 500,000 green jobs. They're going to cut them. Net zero is the opposite of growth. And you guys supported all that and still do.
Well, I was never against gas and oil exploration, not at all. We'll need gas for many years to come. I'm not against rolling out renewable energy projects where they make financial sense, and offshore wind is...
That wasn't what your government's policy was.
What, offshore wind?
No, your government's policy was hitting net zero targets, which involved impoverishing the economy and making energy less secure and less cheap.
Well, I don't think that's right, actually.
I think it is right.
It wasn't the fact that our government outlawed oil and gas exploration licenses as this government is doing. What it was, actually, the banks in their ESG, in the drive towards environmental sustainability, all these kind of goals they set themselves, backed away from funding those.
But it was all put into law under Theresa May's government, under a Conservative government. A lot of this goes back then. No, I'm sorry, I'm not letting you off the hook on this one. The Tories, you're just as plague on all your houses. You're just as bad on this front.
Listen, I think net zero at some point is deliverable. What Kemi is saying, or under new leadership, is what we should do is put the plans in place to how we get there is the point, and then you can decide.
We're not going to get there this century. It's unachievable. It's unaffordable. It's impossible. And while your party still backs it, you are never getting back into power. There's some free political advice to you, Kevin. You're welcome.
I had a debate with Nigel Farage about this. He's not a climate change denier. He thinks we should achieve that.
No one mentioned climate change denial. That's the sort of ridiculous nonsense thing that people say. I'm talking about the clear, hard facts that if you don't have reliable, cheap, secure energy, and that only comes in the form of fossil fuels right now, you are not going to have a booming economy. End of, full stop. That's it. Nothing to discuss.
I said, Julie, we're in violent agreement. I always been in favour of gas exploration.
You were you were a member of a government that was pushing the exact opposite of that. But let's move on from that, Kevin. Look, let's move on from that. When it comes to things like Heathrow, so you're in favour of Heathrow. Look, we've had votes recently. The Prime Minister currently, Keir Starmer, voted against Heathrow expansion only a few years ago. I mean, we know the Energy Secretary is opposed to it. There's been a tweet from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, Labour Mayor, of course, saying he remains opposed to a third runway at Heathrow. He says because of the severe impact it will have on noise, air pollution and, of course, meeting our climate change targets. He's going to look at the impact it will have and the huge knock-on effects on our transport infrastructure, as you mentioned, the M25. But he's not convinced that you can have hundreds of thousands of additional flights at Heathrow every year without a hugely damaging impact on our environment. why do you think the government, the Labour Party, have changed their minds on Heathrow? And do you think realistically, given, net zero rules and legal challenges and the like, that, I'm not going to be, frankly, not just on retirement, but in my grave before that third runway does actually happen?
Well, the reason they're going for it now is because they're panicking, because they've been killed growth in the economy. They now say they're flailing around anything that might stimulate growth. And you're right to say this is a long-term plan in terms of Heathrow, so not deliverable in the short term to return the economy to growth as we saw under the Conservative government. But that's not going to fix this problem. Can I say the other thing about this is Labour are no strangers to saying one thing and doing another. Look at Rachel Reeves. In my area, the number one airport in Yorkshire is Leeds Bradford Airport. So Rachel Reeves opposed. It wasn't even expansion. It was just a rebuilding of the terminal, an ancient terminal there, on the basis she didn't want to see more passengers go through Leeds Bradford Airport.
Yeah.
I mean, saying one thing and doing another. They're no strangers to hypocrisy. It's completely outrageous. They're doing it now because they have no idea how to run this economy, have never been involved in anything in terms of the productive economy ever before in their careers.
OK, I would agree with a lot of that. Here's the thing. What was going on before July the 4th last year? Because I don't recall us living in this amazing booming economy where the Tory government, who absolutely understood all of these things, they'd been building reservoirs and power stations and house building and were totally in control, and growth was booming. Could you, I don't know, maybe I was asleep for some of those years, or I've just got amnesia, but I don't recall it being any better then, do you?
I do, actually.
Do you?
When Labour inherited the economy in July this year, the UK, as you will acknowledge, was the fastest growing economy in the G7.
It was.
That's the reality. Faster than US, Canada and every other major European.
Yeah, but everyone was doing badly.
Well, we grew at 0.7% in the first quarter.
That's life-changing. Life-changing.
It is.
Come on.
It annualises it over 2.5% growth. That's a much better rate of growth. Of course, there are things we didn't do that we should have done. We did many things right. But one of the things we were trying to do when we put the measures in place, and Michael Gove, my predecessor when he was in government, set in place work in terms of accelerating those big projects, nationally significant infrastructure project status, which currently take 4.5 years to get planning consent. They used to take 2.5 years. He put the things in place. He was cutting down the need for environmental assessments. He was taking away some of the legal challenge opportunities. Well, let's go through all the things we did right in 14 years.
You did. There are a lot of things I did agree with, but 14 years.
OK, let's talk about 40 years. The UK was the third highest growth in the G7 in those 14 years. 4 million more jobs in our economy. 1.2 million fewer people out of work. Street crime down 0.5%. Our schools, 90% of them good or outstanding, rather than 66% when we took over. The best readers and the best in terms
schools
of
improved,
mathematics in the Western world. Many improvements. We got some things wrong. Let's put this in context.
OK, one of the things do you think that you got wrong was immigration? Because we talk about growth, we're told constantly by everybody, all the great and the good, all the experts, that mass immigration is good for growth. If it was, we would have seen a lot more growth over the last 20 years when we've seen so many millions more people arrive on our shores. ONS data out yesterday, latest projections, looking at us over a period from 2022 to 2032. In just 7 years' time, we're going to see another 5 million more people net in this country from abroad than we have currently. Bearing in mind their projections have been vastly out of kilter every year for years and always in the same direction. They vastly underestimate. Was that a mistake from Labour on immigration, and what would you do differently now?
Well, we've got to own our own mistakes on migration. We did make mistakes. You're right to say that. I mean, we didn't have any controls over migration until 2020 because of free movement of people. Then we had 2 years...
We did have control on people coming from outside the EU, and we didn't control that either.
Well, you know the figures. The vast majority of our migration in this country prior to that was people from the European Union. So we didn't really have control. 2022, then we had Ukraine and Hong Kong. But you're right to say that the rules were too lax. The visa requirements were not strict enough. We let far too many people come into this country. We then clamped down on that, which is having the effect. Labour's reversed some of those changes, but we absolutely want to see much, much lower levels of migration than in that report. It is not right that we're going to get 5 million more people in this country through net migration over that 10-year period. That is wrong. We have said that. You get much lower levels of migration under a Conservative government.
OK, can I ask you also about another story in the news today? And this is a new opinion poll carried out since the sentencing last Thursday of the Southport killer Axel Rudikabana to a minimum term of 52 years. And that is an increase in support for the death penalty in this country. 55% of Brits now say they would support bring back the death penalty in this country. Of course, it wouldn't have applied to Rudikabana. He was 17 when he committed his crimes, and so he wouldn't have been eligible for it either, in the same way he wasn't eligible for a whole life term. Would the Conservative Party, would you support a return to the death penalty?
Well, I understand the feeling. You know, I mean, you can't look at that situation, that horrible, horrendous crime, without thinking along those lines. But I just don't think that's a solution I don't think that's the right thing to be debating right now. And people can obviously have their views. I think realistically, you see a clear-cut case like that, it's easier thinking those terms. I think most cases are not as clear-cut as that. We'll spend years debating it. People will spend decades on death row, all that kind of stuff. You see this in the US. It sounds all clear-cut. That's not the way the judicial process works. So I think I'm not in favour of that as a consequence. And but I do think what Kemi Badenoch has said is absolutely right, that there should be whole of life sentences if you are 17 in that situation, because there's no way that person should ever come back on
for such a heinous crime. Just funny, you did actually mention the US then. We're talking in the next half hour with a former White House official about Donald Trump and a judge about freezing his plan to sort of massively stopping his plan to freeze federal budgets for worth tens and tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars for federal agencies, and also an offer to 2 million federal employees. Basically, we'll give you 8 months redundancy. Please take it and leave. And they're hoping to lose up to 10% of the staff. Should we try something like that here?
I don't understand why. You're the employer. You can say to your employees where you're required to work. You don't have to give them 8 months' pay to do that. You can say you're coming into work. I was an employer.
But this isn't about people working from home. By the way, you guys couldn't get your own staff in Whitehall to work in the office.
Well, we did work on that, and we should do more on that.
But you couldn't get them to work in the office. You need to be in the office every day, or even 4 days a week. They said no, nothing was done about it.
All my private office, when I was a minister, all worked in the office every single day. And that was the reality. We had lots of work to do.
Most of Whitehall doesn't.
But should government become more efficient? My God, it should do. The public sector is 8.5% less efficient than it was in 2019. If you return to those levels of efficiency, that's about 80-90 billion pounds of savings. You don't need to stick up taxes to pay for those public services. No. You just need to make the government more efficient.
If only you'd been in power for 5 years after that point and could have done something about it. I'm not letting you go. Kevin Hollinrake, I so appreciate you turning up and coming on the show. I hope you'll come back. But we speak truth. We speak truth on this show. Kevin Hollinrake, Tory MP, Shadow Housing Secretary there.